there's a lot of pressure from Antony Blinken and others to have sight of a clear and credible plan to protect civilians, which he says he hasn't seen. Have you got one? Good morning.
Good morning to you, Nick, and good morning to all your listeners. Yes, indeed, it is Remembrance Day here, where we remember the more than 25,000 Israeli soldiers that have fallen in defense of this country, together with more than 5,000 civilians that have been killed by terrorist attacks. So, there's a lot to unpack here. Let me take them apart one by one. On the first thing about the numbers of this war. Number one. This wasn't a war we wanted, or a war we wanted a fight, but it was a war which was forced upon us. Our latest figures, the Israeli government's latest figures, I remind you, Nick, as you yourself know, this is a democracy with checks and balances, with a robust media, with an independent judicial system. We believe that we've killed 14,000 terrorists alone in this conflict. And we think that about a similar number, maybe 16,000 civilians have been killed. Now, of course, every single civilian death is a tragedy. But for Hamas, of course, it's a strategy. They want their own civilians to die.
I'm grateful for the figures, Mr. Mencer, and thank you. But my question was, is there the clear and credible plan that Antony Blinken is calling for? Mr. Mencer.
So far be it from me for an Israeli government spokesman to contradict the Secretary of State, but he has been presented with our plan, and our plan is open for all to see. The plan is as happening right now. We're moving civilians out of harm's way. We're letting them know by email, by text message, by phone call, in Arabic, on the radio, on the internet, with text messages. We're letting them know the precise streets by which to leave and where to go, where they can be safe. In the Al-Mawasi district, in Khan Yunis, places where we've set up shelter, we've set up hospitals, we've set up food, we've set up water, places for them to be safe to evacuate to. Now, of course, this is a terrible, terrible war, and Hamas want to maximize the civilian deaths on their own side. It's very important for that.
But Mr. Mencer, why is it? I read that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I read that now IDF are fighting in areas that they had already defeated Hamas in once. So if that is correct, clearly something is not working. There's a vacuum that allows Hamas to regroup, or something is not working in the IDF plan. Do you have a sense of what it might be, Mr. Mencer?
Well, I won't be sharing our battle plans with you on.
But is it right? You are fighting areas where you actually fought before? Because,
needless to say,
it's not working then, is it, sir?
We've done, Nick, if you allow me to reply.
Go ahead,
we've
sir.
done everything in our power to get our hostages back. If there has been a chance to get our people back, and that has meant moving or redeploying our troops in different areas, we've tried that. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked. You know why it hasn't worked? Because a crucial element has been missing, and we are replacing that crucial element. And that is brute military force against Hamas. That's what's been effective in the past. We'll always put our hand out to peace, Nick. You know Israel better than most of your listeners. We'll always put our hand out to peace first, but it is brute military force together with negotiations which gets results. And that's what we're going for. We've got 132 hostages in there. Some of them have been killed by Hamas. We're going to get them out. We're going to clear the last 4 battalions of Hamas out of Rafah, and we're going to return peace to this region so we can get back to coexistence here.
David Mencer, I'm grateful for your time. Thank you. And, of course, my thoughts towards you and your nation as it remembers Remembrance Day. David Mencer's with the Israeli government. Listening to that is Brigadier John Deverell, who's former Director of Defence Diplomacy at the Ministry of Defence and senior British officer in the Palestinian, senior British officers in the Palestinian territories. Brigadier, we have a sort of split here between the government, who says it's business as usual, but we're keeping them on notice, and Labour Party, who would say, actually, we need to look to suspend. If I might ask you such a sort of crude question, Brigadier, which line do you support? Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. Well, thanks for having me on. I must say I find what you just heard now from Mr. Mencer somewhat unconvincing as a former military planner. The reality is, of course, that a lot of the Hamas fighters have been given opportunity because the IDF has taken their hand off certain areas of Gaza over the last few weeks to move out of Rafah. Therefore, for my money, the IDF operations there are largely political and largely presentational. As far as what Lord Cameron has been saying, to my mind, he's quite neatly sidestepping the essential unlawfulness of continuing to provide weapon components to Israel by saying that the numbers are very small, 0.01%. by conflating the impact on Hamas and also the very small numbers, therefore, in terms of the weapons. He's essentially giving a pass to the British government to continue to do what it's doing, conveniently distracting from the principles of clarity, honesty, and quite frankly, what should be a good example to other nations. Mindful that both Holland and Canada weeks ago stopped providing weapons, and of course we know what America's doing. So I think increasingly, as far as our government's concerned, we're out on a limb.
Brigadier, if we go to those parts of Gaza where the IDF are returning, presumably the effective power vacuum that is there, that's tremendous breeding ground for recruitment for Hamas, isn't it, Brigadier?
Well, of course it is, absolutely, Nick. Thanks for mentioning it. And of course, people have long memories. From our point of view, being a somewhat older nation, people remind us that with censure that over 300 years ago, the siege of Drogheda, in 1649, Oliver Cromwell, a lot of civilians were killed. And memories are very long, and this will continue absolutely, as you say, to be a very effective recruiting sergeant for Hamas. Going back to the point earlier which was made before Mr. Mencer came on, the issue of Hamas being terrorists, of course these fighters are absolute terrorists. But we mustn't forget that, of course, it's a much wider movement containing people who are not terrorists. It's a wider ethos political movement. But of course, these people are absolute bastards and need to be taken down, commensurate with law of armed conflict.
Brigadier, I must end it there only for time reasons. Thank you. Apology for outdoor language, but the Brigadier feels very passionate about that. And I think, as we could use Lord Cameron's language, anybody who shoots someone in front of members of their family or rapes innocent women, I think we can probably use that word. But apologies for any sensitivities that were troubled.